Okay, I had said that I was going to make a kind of a bonus video about where did God come from and where did uh, Cain get a wife. So let's deal with the Cain thing first. And it has to do with time. Wait a minute, I'll stop. Now I hope this continues where I left off. I just had to stop a minute and pick up a Bible. One of the problems we have is that we don't know how much time passes between verses in the Bible. Now I'm in chapter 4 of Genesis, and down in verse 25, after it talks about Cain and Abel and all that sort of thing, it says, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Adam whom Cain slew. And to him, and to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos, and then began men to call upon the name of the Lord." So in one verse, we go from Seth being born. The next verse, suddenly he's having children. So, we got a passage of time there we don't know about. And then in chapter 5, it talks about the genealogy of Adam. And it says, "Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called him Seth." So it skips the birth of Cain and Abel. And we'll talk about why generations are skipped and all that sort of thing. But and this says, and this was after Adam was 130 years old. Now we don't know if we started counting when Adam was created. We're not sure when that was. We're not sure if we started counting after Adam was thrown out of the Garden of Eden. Anyway, it doesn't say. But after he lived, he was 130 years old, from some measure, when Seth was born. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Now, we don't tell me who those sons were, and don't tell me who those daughters were, and doesn't tell me how many there were. But he lived a total that after Seth he lived 800 years. So, and it was 130, so he's 930 years old. And then it says he begat sons and daughters. Well, and as it goes through all of the generations, it keeps saying sons and daughters and sons and daughters. Now, if a generation, let's say the reproduction generation is only 20 years or 30 years, to only be generous, then in 100 years, you could produce 3 generations, and those generations would reproduce. So in 500 years or 800 years, just think. And you see, in those days, women still had children. They didn't stop having children at the age of 40 or 50. Adam's wife, Sarah, had a child at the age of 90 because that's what God wanted her to do. So in the beginning, the gene pool was pure. There was no problem with bad genes or sickness or disease or any of those kind of things yet. And there was no prohibition yet of intermarriage. So brothers married their sisters and their nieces and their aunts, and there are all sorts of intermarriage in the family because that's all there were. But there were, and I can't do the math because it's too complicated for me and I don't have all the information, but if all these people were living 5, 6, 7, 800 years and having children for at least 400 or 500 of those years, then that's a lot of people. And they all didn't stay home. They moved out. So and we don't know how Cain was when he and Adam had their disagreement and he killed Abel. The Bible doesn't tell us how old he was. But he left home, he moved out to where his brothers and sisters were, and he married one of them. I know that sounds simplified, but that's the answer, and that's the way it is. We have a problem, and I'll talk about this some later, in studying the Bible with timelines, because as you just saw, in one verse to the next verse, you can move 100 years, and we don't know what happened in all that period of time. But anyway, that's that quick answer as to where Cain got a wife. Now let me deal with where did God come from. When Moses saw the burning bush and God appeared to him in the burning bush, Moses said, and God told him to go, and get the children of Israel free. He said, well, who's going to believe me? Who am I tell them sent me? And God said, tell them I am. Okay. I am is a very powerful statement. It says that God is self-existent and self-sufficient. Now, what I'm going to tell you is something that your human mind cannot understand. Neither can mine, neither can anybody's. We cannot understand God. If we could understand God, we'd be God. But God is beyond our comprehension. You see, we can only measure what we can understand. We know that everything, as far as we understand it, has a beginning and an end. We can't imagine anything that doesn't have a beginning. That's one of our dimensions. We know things that have a height and a width and a depth and a time. Everything has a beginning and an end for us. But God does not. You see, in the first verse of the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God created. The Bible never makes any attempt to explain God. It just makes a statement that God is. In the beginning is the beginning of time. You see, God is outside of time. God created time for our benefit. So we exist in a time span. We have a beginning and an end. Everything in the creation has a beginning and an end. Everything that we know has a beginning and an end, except God. Now, I can't tell you where God existed before God created everything that we know anything about, because again, my mind just will not do that. I remember when I was a teenager, one of the great mental challenges I had was to lay in bed and try to imagine what there was before there was anything. And all I could come up with was a great blackness. Well, even that is something. And that, my mind and your mind will not do, we can't imagine nothing. So we don't know what there was before God created everything that we know anything about, except that God was. God is. God always will be. Now, because God created time, and because God stands outside of time, God does not have to wait on the future to happen, because for him it already has. God is what is called the eternal now. There is no past, no present, no future. That's the reason God doesn't change. God doesn't need to change. God is perfect in all of his being. Now, the Bible sometimes talks about God's eyes or God's hands or some form of God, but nobody has seen God. You can't see God because God is a spirit, and we can't see spirits. How do we know he exists? Same way we know the wind exists, because we see its effect. You can't see the wind, but you know it blows. You know it's out there. We see the results of God. We see God's power. We see God's everything that God has done. If you're a Christian, you know God, and we'll deal with that sometime later. But nobody's ever seen God. When Moses was on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments, he asked to see God, and God said, you can't see me. I'll cause my glory to pass by you. And he turned Moses' face to the wall, and and somehow passed by him. Moses got so close to God's glory that when he came down off the mountain, his face glowed so much he had to wear a veil. God led the children of Israel with a tower of cloud in the daytime and a tower of fire at night. That was not God, but it was something that God put out there for people to see. The reason people turned to idols was because they wanted something they could see. And they could not see God. Kind of reminds me of a little kid that was going to bed and he was afraid of the dark, and his mama told him he didn't have to be afraid of the dark, that God was always with him. He said, yes, but I want someone with skin on them. He wanted somebody he could see and feel and hope. So a lot of people have a hard time believing in God because they cannot see God. But we see God's effect. We see everything that God is. And the Bible says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. We believe in God because of our faith. We'll deal with faith as we go on. So where did God come from? God didn't come from anywhere. God just always was, and you cannot understand that, and I cannot understand that, but you must believe that. I believe that. That's faith. You see, I told you that Christianity is not a religion. It is not. It's a relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. And that relationship is based upon faith. The belief in something or someone or a promise or whatever that we cannot see. You see, you're saved, you're forgiven by faith in a promise from God that Jesus Christ paid a price for your sin. And we'll deal about that in a few days. There's a lesson coming up about salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. So I hope, I was going to say, I hope this helps you understand. You will not understand. You cannot understand. You just must believe that God exists. God always has existed. God is self-sufficient. And there's no way for us to understand God because he is God. So I want to deal with, maybe I'll do that later today or maybe in a few minutes, I don't know. I want to deal with the Bible. We talked just a little bit about the timeline of the Bible, but I want to talk about the Bible and why we have it and why we should study it and what good it is. In the meantime, I love you. I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.